Imagine living in a land with no centralized government, no police force, no standing army, no national court system. Every village defends itself. Every tribe protects its own borders. Every dispute can escalate into bloodshed. Now imagine that your neighbors possess superior military technology. They control trade routes. They dominate the plains. They have iron weapons. For nearly 3 centuries, ancient Israel lived in this reality. This period, commonly known as the era of the Judges, lasted roughly from the late 13th century BCE until the rise of the monarchy in the 11th century BCE. It was a time of instability, foreign domination, internal collapse, and repeated attempts at survival. It was also a political experiment. A nation without a king. The vacuum after Joshua. Joshua had served as a unifying military commander. He coordinated tribal campaigns, maintained strategic alliances, and functioned as a central authority figure after Moses. But when Joshua died, no successor was appointed. There was no constitutional framework, no dynastic succession, no national council capable of exercising binding authority over all 12 tribes. The centralized military structure dissolved almost immediately. What remained were tribal territories scattered across hills, valleys, and borderlands. Each tribe operated independently. Local elders resolved disputes. Clan leaders organized defense. But there was no unified chain of command. The biblical record summarizes this era with a repeated statement. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This phrase reflects more than spiritual commentary. It describes a political condition, decentralization. Justice became localized and inconsistent. If livestock were stolen, retaliation followed. If land was disputed, armed conflict could erupt between clans. Without centralized arbitration, private vengeance filled the vacuum. And surrounding nations observed the fragmentation. The landscape of survival. Israel entered Canaan with expectations of agricultural stability. The plains were fertile. The valleys were productive. But control of those regions required military dominance. Canaanite city-states and later Philistine coalitions possessed iron chariots. In the late Bronze to early Iron Age transition, iron represented strategic superiority. Iron weapons and chariot components were more durable and lethal than bronze. Bronze dulls quickly. Iron reshapes battlefields. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests that Israel initially lacked access to iron metallurgy. In fact, later biblical texts explicitly state that Israel had no blacksmiths capable of forging iron weapons. The result was strategic retreat. Israelite settlements migrated toward the hill country. Archaeological surveys have identified hundreds of small agrarian sites emerging in highland regions during this period. These settlements were modest. Stone structures, limited fortifications, agrarian economies. They were not built for expansion. They were built for concealment and survival. Engineering against the desert. Mountain life required innovation. Rainfall was seasonal. Natural springs were limited. To survive, inhabitants developed rock-cut cistern systems. They carved deep chambers into limestone bedrock and lined them with waterproof plaster. These cisterns collected rainwater and preserved it through dry months. Without these systems, highland habitation would have been impossible. But water was only one challenge. The Midianites and Amalekites conducted seasonal raids. These were not conventional invasions. They were economic assaults. Mounted on camels, raiders could travel quickly across terrain. They targeted crops and livestock. They destroyed harvests just before reaping. The text compares them to locusts. The objective was starvation. In response, Israelite families developed hidden storage techniques. Grain silos were dug underground and concealed within courtyards or homes. Agriculture became covert. This was a society living defensively, technologically inferior, economically fragile, politically fragmented, yet they endured cycles of domination. The era of the judges followed a recurring pattern: oppression, crisis, deliverance, temporary peace, relapse. One early domination came from Moab. Israel paid tribute to King Eglon. Deliverance came through Ehud. Ehud's left-handedness became a strategic advantage. He crafted a double-edged dagger and concealed it on his right thigh. Guards typically searched the left side of visitors. During a private audience, Ehud assassinated Eglon. The act triggered revolt. Moabite forces were defeated. The land experienced 80 years of relative peace. But peace without structural reform is fragile. When Ehud died, the cycle resumed. Deborah and the chariot crisis. In the north, Canaanite forces under General Sisera dominated with 900 iron chariots. For 20 years, northern tribes endured subjugation. Leadership arose in Deborah, described as both prophet and judge. She summoned Barak and instructed him to gather forces near Mount Tabor. Descending into the valley of Kishon appeared tactically dangerous. Chariots excel in flat terrain. But environmental conditions shifted the outcome. A sudden storm flooded the valley. Mud immobilized the heavy chariots. Infantry forces advanced. Sisera fled on foot. He sought refuge in the tent of Jael. While he slept, she killed him. The technological advantage collapsed under environmental pressure. Once again, deliverance came not through institutional strength, but through circumstance and individual action. Gideon and psychological warfare. Midianite oppression intensified. Gideon emerged reluctantly. When introduced, he was threshing wheat in a winepress, hiding from raiders. He gathered 32,000 men, but the force was reduced to 300. Confusion spread. In darkness and panic, Midianite forces turned against each other. Victory came without traditional combat. Yet after success, Gideon created a golden religious object from war spoils. It later became a source of spiritual deviation. Deliverance did not produce long-term reform. Jephthah and the cost of impulsivity. Jephthah, rejected by his family due to illegitimate birth, became a regional warrior. When the Ammonites threatened Israel, elders sought his leadership. Before battle, he made a vow that if victorious, he would sacrifice whatever first emerged from his house. He won decisively. But the first to greet him was his only daughter. The narrative presents a tragic conclusion. Victory brought personal devastation. This episode reveals the theological confusion of the era. Leadership operated without consistent spiritual grounding. Impulsivity replaced reflection. Samson and the Iron Age superpower. The Philistines represented a more organized and technologically advanced threat. They controlled coastal trade routes and iron production centers. Archaeology confirms Philistine mastery of early iron metallurgy. Israel had no comparable infrastructure. Samson emerged as a figure of extraordinary physical strength. Consecrated under a Nazirite vow, his life symbolized separation. Yet his actions were often personal. He killed 30 men to settle a wager. He burned fields as retaliation. He killed 1,000 soldiers with a donkey's jawbone. Eventually, he revealed the secret of his strength to Delilah. Captured and blinded, he was enslaved. In his final act, he collapsed a Philistine temple, killing many leaders. His death weakened Philistine authority. But Israel remained politically fragmented. Shiloh and spiritual collapse. Shiloh functioned as the religious center. The Ark of the Covenant rested there. But corruption had entered the priesthood. When the Philistines attacked, Israel carried the ark into battle, assuming divine presence guaranteed victory. The result was catastrophic. 30,000 soldiers died. The ark was captured. Eli died upon hearing the news. His grandson was named Ichabod, meaning, "the glory has departed." Archaeological excavations at Shiloh revealed destruction layers consistent with this period. Religious authority collapsed alongside political stability. Civil war and moral breakdown. The crisis at Gibeah marked the moral low point. A severe crime triggered tribal outrage. 400,000 men mobilized. Benjamin resisted surrendering perpetrators. Civil war followed. Thousands died. Benjamin was nearly annihilated. The decentralized confederation had turned on itself. Freedom without central restraint had devolved into fragmentation. The political turning point. As Samuel aged and his sons proved corrupt, the elders approached him with a demand. They wanted a king. They observed neighboring nations. Egypt had centralized power. Assyria maintained standing armies. Philistia controlled iron. Israel wanted stability. Samuel warned them. A king would tax grain and livestock. He would conscript sons for war. He would centralize land and authority. But fear of insecurity outweighed fear of monarchy. Saul was chosen. The era of judges ended. 3 centuries of decentralized tribal leadership gave way to centralized rule. Israel exchanged uncertain freedom for structured authority. The political experiment concluded. The Age of Kings began. And the lessons of those 300 years would shape the nation's identity for generations to come.